Your party is heading to conference this weekend. 2 days of different ideas and political factions will forge a basis of a new electoral vehicle to take on the political establishment. From the beginning, the party promised to be a fully democratic grassroots organisation. Since the party's announcement, it's been no secret there has been open splits and drama. Democracy is messy. One organisation that seeks to see a democratic structure built for a party of the working class is the Democratic Socialists of your party. I spoke to Max Shanley, representing the organisation, to discuss their political agenda. First off, can you tell me what Democratic Socialists of your party is?
Democratic Socialists of your party is a grassroots organisation of ordinary your party members fighting for democracy and socialism within the party. We're fighting for a radically democratic party that represents a break from Labourism. We don't want this party to see itself as this kind of successor to the Labour Party, but more as the heir to the Chartists and the great radical tradition of this country.
Now, we hear many people and organisations call themselves socialists, yet seemingly put forward a social democratic programme. This organisation is a full socialist programme. Can you tell us the main political agenda of this organisation?
We want the party to adopt a fully fledged socialist programme that does root and branch changes to society, doesn't simply tinker around the edges. There's a very big trend amongst some sections of the left that we have to kind of downplay what we believe in, and we think that that's bollocks, basically, and that we should say who we are on the tin. So we're fighting for essentially turning the world upside down, and we're starting with the British state. We want to abolish the monarchy and have a democratic republic, which is free of bureaucratic interference and domination by capital over labour and nature in this country. And that takes various different measures in terms of we want to bring public utilities and the like into public ownership, including telecommunications. We want to bring banking into public ownership as well, and democratize those institutions into public utilities, into actual public utilities that are under democratic control. And we don't believe that we should be paying a penny to do so, because if you take the energy companies, for example, they charge exorbitant rates. Their shareholders have made many a pretty penny since those utilities were privatized. They've made their money numerous times over. And what do we get in return? Well, in the case of the electricity companies, we have old people sitting in freezing cold conditions during the winters, families that can't afford to keep the heating on. In terms of the water companies, we have companies that are making massive profits whilst the infrastructure is basically on its last legs. It's not been upgraded in a large part since the Victorian era, and they're now pouring sewage into our rivers and into the sea. And in the case of the banks, look, I turned 18 right as the financial crisis was taking hold. And, we nationalised the banks, some of them, but we kept them in the hands of the bankers. And they've not changed one iota, and they'll never change, right? Because their sole pursuit in life is profit. And what we're saying is that banking is too important and financial services are too important for them to be in the hands of a few people. They need to be controlled by the many, and we need to end the situation we're in, whereby we're relying on private private gratitude to fund investment in this country, and instead we want that to be under democratic control. There's a whole load of things. We have a comprehensive vision when it comes to the party having a political program, and you can read the entire thing on dsyp.org.
Yeah, the banks is a big one because we do hear from a lot of, sort of left organisations and parties about water, energy, mail, rail being put in public ownership. We don't hear about the banks, and you're absolutely right. When it comes to 2008, that was capitalism in crisis,
Yeah.
and we've kind of shied away from talking about the banks actually, which is quite
Yeah,
surprising. I
and it's
really
not
want to
just
talk
the
about that.
banks. It's not just the banks. We wanna take key strategic national industries into public ownership as well. I can't remember the exact figures, and I apologise to your viewers for not having the figures, but, last time I checked, there was a very small number of companies that are responsible for the vast amount of Britain's economic output, like, as a percentage of GDP or whatever. And if that's the case, then they're too big to fail. And if they're too big to fail, then they need to be brought under democratic control. Um, and they need to be publicly owned because we're all reliant on their production. But we wanna change the entire social relationship between workers and their work. And we're big into workers' control and everything like that.
Yes, that's something I'm very interested in because once again, we hear a lot from socialists and socialist parties or organizations, and they do talk about look bread and butter issues like wages, inequality, taxes, public ownership, and they're all good popular things the public supports. We all support. Um, but we haven't spoken about workers' control and the means of production. So with your or the organization you're part of, what's on the agenda when it comes to the private market and workers?
So, I mean, we have a variety of different views, right? We're a multi-tendency organisation, which means we've got people from a broad range of traditions. We're by no means ideologically homogenous. Um, we think that it would be possible politically, in the political sense, to end capital's rule as a class. So they would no longer be the ruling class in our society and through the state. However, we do recognise that capitalist social relations aren't going to disappear overnight, and the capitalist economy will probably carry on going for at least a generation or two. But uh, a good way of viewing it is that imagine capital is a bird. They would be stuck within a cage, and that cage would be democratic control. So they could fly about inside the cage as much as they want to. And it will be, sometimes it'll be a fairly large cage, sometimes it will be a smaller cage. But they're in a cage, and that cage is the democratic control via working class democracy. By which I mean, majoritarian democracy.
Would it be fair to say it's kind of not that it's the end goal, but looking at sort of a market socialist system where it's not mass decommodification, but at the very least, when it comes to companies and organizations and firms, it's participation of democracy, whether it's completely worker owned or boards, for example, workers and boards.
Yeah, no, I would say it's a mixed economy based on size. So the really big companies are firmly under democratic control. Look, we're not talking about or advocating that, the corner shop is nationalised or the fish and chip shop's taken under municipal control or anything like that, right? But it's about taking the power away that employers have over the employed, and that can only be done through the democratisation of the economy.
So let's go back to Dem Socks, if you don't mind me calling it that, and your party. So I looked at the website. Can you explain the proposed structure from Dem Socks to your party? Because I went on the website. It is a little bit complex. So are you able to sort of maybe briefly go over the structure that you would like to see?
Yeah, so just to go to like the kind of political theory behind it, um, hitherto all existing parties in Britain have reflected in their structures, practices, and modes of behaviour the type of society that they come from. If let's take the Labour Party, for example, right? The Labour Party is structured a lot like capitalism, right? So you have a monarch, that's the party leader. You have uh, a kind of government, but that doesn't have full powers because the power is still technically in the monarch's hand in the form of the NEC, who the who the membership, who are in this case the taxpayer, elect from time to time, and they rule over them. What we want to do is we want to turn that triangle upside down so that the membership are fully in command, right? Not MPs, not celebrities, nothing like that. And we call this a party republic because we think that democracy is when the governed govern themselves, right? And that's the promise of a republic, essentially. And so the structures that we're proposing are basically that. We want to have radical democratic structures where the vast majority of power flows from below, but is counterbalanced by the necessity of some degree of centralization at the top. But they're constantly being pulled back and forth amongst each other, and that um, when it comes to uh, things like members of parliament and councillors and whatnot, that they are subordinate to the party mass. When it comes to things like regional parties, for example, we don't want them to sit above local parties. We want them to sit below the local parties. All power to them flows from the local parties, not the other way around. You saw this in the Labour Party, where regional parties had oversight of local parties. No, 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 no. We're saying that local parties will have oversight of the regional parties. It completely turns the relationship on the head. And yeah, so we recognise, as I said, that at a national level, you do need to counterbalance some necessity of some degree of centralisation. But the only way that that effectively works is by embracing the idea that leadership is a two-way street from above and below in constant democratic tension with one another. We want the parties to have a collective leadership because we believe that collective wisdom is everything. It's our greatest strength. But also because I think what this recent period has shown is that, having one leader or even having two leaders drawn particularly from parliament does a socialist organisation no favours, and it kind of runs against the grain of what we believe in, really, because we don't believe in a monarchy or a presidential system or anything like that. We believe in people power, and you have to have people power inside of your own party. So, in that sense, just going back to the whole idea of how political parties reflect the society that they come from, we're very much saying that this party has to reflect the type of society that we're trying to build. Um, there's a good old saying, I can't remember where it originates. I have a feeling that it comes from Tony Benn, that unless you democratize the party, you can't democratize the state. And if you can't democratize the state, you can't democratize the economy. And I hate to break it to your viewers, but if you can't democratize the economy, then you can't have socialism.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was Tony Benn, and he was
Yeah.
100% right about that.
Oh, Wedgie was 110% correct.
About a lot of things. Um,
Yeah, no,
you're a big Bennite.
I'm a big Bennite. I knew Tony. He was a lovely man.
I never had the pleasure to meet him, unfortunately. In fact, he died. Was it 2013? Before I was
2014.
2014. Before I was actually into politics. Um, but it
I'm
would have been a
sure you
pleasure
were
to
a
meet
young whippersnapper.
him.
I'm
Whippersnapper.
getting old. I'm getting old. I'm 36 next month.
Oh well, I'm 32, so maybe.
Yeah, but still younger than me.
um, I appreciate democratic socialist is not just an electoral vehicle. It's both, right? It's an organizational
Yeah,
vehicle and electoralism. It engages in it,
and we
right?
don't want the party to be solely defined by
Yeah,
electorate, right? Because if electoralism is our sole measure of success, people are going to get very demoralised very, very quickly.
that's kind of what the Labour Party does, though. It throws
Yeah.
out a lot of its principles in favour of power. Um, my question, though, I suppose, is what does collective leadership look like to you? Because, of course, I understand if, as an organisation, a grassroots organisation, you can have that, but because it does dip its toe into electoralism, your party is fighting for seats. Does that mean you have a figurehead? Does that mean you have rotational leadership? What do you mean by collective leadership? I appreciate that's also the membership having a strong say, but in terms of a figurehead, what does that look like?
Well, okay, so the system that we propose in Democratic Socialists is that you would have a collective leadership made up of, oh, I can't remember the exact figure. I think it's 16 individual members, and then you would have two separately elected co chairs who would be the primary spokespeople for the organisation. But they would have no powers otherwise greater than any other member of the collective leadership. They'd be the ones that would go on television and argue the toss and make statements on the party's behalf or whatever, but they themselves would be a part of the collective leadership and accountable to them. Now, we do recognise that we live in a parliamentary democracy, and we will also need a parliamentary figurehead. So we propose that there be a parliamentary convener, and that this parliamentary convener stands on annual terms, is elected by conference, and can only stand for 2 terms at a time. So after 2 terms, you have to take a break for another 2 terms. Um, and they would be the party's most prominent voice inevitably, right? Because the media is so focused on that kind of politics. But they wouldn't be the leader of the party. They wouldn't have any control over the party. They would sit on the collective leadership. They would have speaking rights, but they wouldn't have voting rights. And that's fundamentally because our philosophy is that we believe that in a socialist party, all members are equal and no member is more equal than anybody else. We don't like this idea that there's beautiful people in the party or special people who we must all look up to and obey, and you know, but who have zero accountability whatsoever. I think a good example is during the Corbyn leadership years of the Labour Party, the balance of power really flipped on its head because, traditionally, or at least theoretically, um, the leadership is accountable to the membership. But what actually occurred between 2015 and 2019 was that the membership became accountable to the leadership. We don't ever want we don't ever want the left to be in that situation ever again.
What would you say to people who would think these are great ideas, but given not just that we have a parliamentary democracy, but actually our attention span has become very short, and actually sole leaders are quite effective. I mean, some people were not particularly happy with the Green Party having co-leaders. They prefer Zach Polanski. I mean, we have to admit he's done far better in terms of communication than the previous leaders. What about, for example, I mean, some might say, look, your party would never have got 50,000 members or even 800,000 sign-ups without the involvement of Zara Sultan and Jeremy Corbyn. These people were pretty famous, still galvanise people. Would that potentially remove any kind of momentum if there was a collective ownership and there wasn't some kind of person who's got history on the left who could draw people? Is there a tension there between sort of collective leadership and mass appeal?
I don't think so, right? Because Jeremy and Zara would still be prominent activists within the party and they would still be a draw to people outside. But what we're saying is just because you have that draw, you shouldn't have control, right? We don't believe in a system of internal dictatorship, which is the model of basically all political parties in Britain, essentially. If you're the leader of a political party, you're essentially an absolute monarch, absolutist monarch. And we think that's wrong. And if you concentrate power in the hands of one person, it will inevitably go to their head. It's just an inevitable fact of life that power does ultimately corrupt. But if power is shared, it's less likely to be corrupted, especially when there's checks and balances that require continuous rotation of the leadership. And because we're arguing that leadership should be elected by conference, and I'll go into exactly why that is in a second, um, it means that they can also be held account by conference. Now, the reason why we argue that nationally elected figures should be elected by the conference is that there's a bit of a contradiction uh, going, and this kind of goes back to Labour Party experience, right? Which is conference is supposed to be the highest governing body of the party. Okay, it's the party's parliament essentially. But if the party doesn't elect the executive, how can its parliament hold it to account? Uh, Having direct elections is fine, right? I believe in it at a local level. I believe that we should have all member meetings to elect delegates and so on. But online balloting essentially means that you atomize people as individuals and you don't engage with them as part of a collective participatory process. It's also historically completely antithetical to the workers' movement and the idea of working class democracy. The introduction of uh, plebiscitary elections, um, uh, into, first with mail-in ballots and then with online balloting, is a right-wing policy. Right, it was forced upon the workers' movement by Margaret Thatcher as part of her attacks on the trade unions. It was the policy of the Gang of Four in the Labour Party against the Bennites. Um, the Labour right introduced plebiscitary democracy, which they like to describe as one member, one vote. But historically, one member, one vote means delegate democracy. It doesn't mean direct elections. Um, because they believe that Labour Party activists were to the left of them and that the membership was just as right wing as they were, if not more right wing. Then they decided that the membership was too left wing, so they were going to go to the public, who they thought were just as right wing as they were, if not more so. It then turned out, due to a unique set of historical circumstances, that that wasn't the case. And now they want to go back to it just being MPs, right? And I think a lot of the problem here is that when you have direct elections nationally, you don't have a proper conversation about the actual politics that are at play and the politics that people represent. You also cannot guarantee that the decisions of conference are carried out because it means that there's different sets of mandates within the party. So let's say you had a single leader who was elected by online balloting directly of all members. They could legitimately say, well, I'm not bound by conference decisions because I wasn't elected by conference, which means conference decisions would get ignored. And ultimately, what that means is that member decisions would get ignored. Um, we also believe, for example, that every single member of the collective leadership can be subject to recall, that local parties can trigger special conferences to remove people from the leadership and replace them with somebody else. Um, so I think what we're articulating for is a return to the traditions of working class democracy in this country and the rest of the world, rather than the kind of right wing uh, policy that has been thrust upon us from above, not from below, that is fundamentally designed to diminish collective culture, participatory culture. And unless we do it, I think, unless we do it that way, we will end up in a party where members feel very much detached from the day-to-day running of their own organisation. They will feel alienated from it. And like I said before, we're about saying that the party has to reflect the type of society that we aspire to build. And as socialists, we believe in a society where people aren't alienated.
I mean, I really understand the point about um when it comes to like online balloting for something. It is atomizing in a way because you could be voting in, at home on your laptop on your phone, and that's it. You sort of forget about it. You like the in person or more democratic participation is more democratic, right? But I suppose there's kind of an internal contradiction even on the left. When we go back to the Labour Party, the left opposed sort of the membership voting for the leader because they thought the membership was more right wing. It turns out Jeremy Corbyn was elected, and that sort of flipped on his head. And now there's a push from the Labour establishment, although the entire party is now the establishment, to go back on that because it was a victory for the left, even though the left opposed it. And these people might say, well, actually, if you don't support that sort of idea and principle, is that saying you don't trust ordinary people? The right wing may say that. Hey, look, we why don't you want to open it up to membership? Why shouldn't we have sort of online balloting? It's easier access. Does that mean we don't trust these people? Do you understand sort of what critics might
I
say
do,
about that? Yeah,
I do, I do, right? But all we're saying is that local party meetings are the ballot box,
yeah.
not your computer screen, right? They're the ballot box, they're the debate in society, they're the public meeting where ideas are actually thrashed out, not simply uh, through the capitalist media, you know, or stuff that you've read online or whatever, rather than you being isolated, rather than an isolated democracy, we want a participatory democracy. And I think actually what the use of direct elections within the Labour Party has shown is that um, far from it being universal suffrage, what it actually represents is universal disempowerment. Because people can claim, well, look, I've got a direct majority of hundreds of thousands of people. Conference is irrelevant. The national executive is irrelevant. My mandate is direct, everything like that. And we want the entire system of democracy to be kind of one giant circle in, constant rotation. And what those who argue for direct elections really want is atomization. They don't want members to actually be involved. They would like a paper membership, and we don't want a paper membership, right? Now, look, I'm of the opinion that I think within the next 3 or 4 years, your party could easily have 200,000 members on paper, right? And I've been told by friends that that's probably a fairly conservative estimate. I think we're in a difficult place right now, but there's 3.5 years till the next election, so it's not all over till the fat lady sings. However, I do not want 200,000 paper members. I want 200,000 active members, right? And the way that you make them active is that you build party life, right? And the only way that you can build party life is not just through electoralism. You need to be going out there. One of the key things that this party needs to do is to initiate a period of class reformation, right? Because the working class ain't what it used to be. As an organised force in and for itself, it doesn't really exist. Some people will point to the trade unions and go, oh, they've got 6.5 million members. Have you looked at the turnout of any union election in the past 2 decades? Incredibly low. Nowadays, a lot of people view their trade union membership as a kind of workplace insurance scheme rather than an act of industrial solidarity or class solidarity or anything like that. So I think it's very clear that whilst working class identity in this country is strong, it doesn't always reflect the material reality of the situation. You only need to open up the papers every so often, and they'll always be talking about some working class millionaire. But I hate to break it to you, but if you're a millionaire, you're not part of the working class, you know. And there's plenty of people in this country who are part of the working class, but don't consider themselves to be part of the working class because we have a very, strange sort of social class system in Britain that doesn't align with material reality.
I mean, we have weak class consciousness. Actually, I was having a conversation yesterday about the lack of class consciousness. I think, I mean, this next question then I think is really interesting then, because your party has a sortition system for conference. First of all, can you kind of explain what it is? And based on your answers, I'm not sure if you support it or not. So, do you support sortition?
So I'm in a really weird position, but I'll explain what sortition is first. So sortition is it comes from Athens, from Athenian democracy. It's like the oldest form of democracy whereby people are selected by lot. So it's just random. It's like buying a lottery ticket. You might win, you might not. That's what sortition is, right? I supported a form of sortition that I described as sortition plus purely for the founding conference. And the reason why I supported sortition plus for the founding conference was because we didn't have any branch infrastructure whereby delegates could be elected. Because I fundamentally think that workers' representatives should be accountable to the people that send them there. Um, so I proposed something called Sortition Plus, where 20% of those in attendance would be essentially factional observers with speaking rights, and those factional observers would have been elected by groups of members coming together to form factions, platforms, tendencies, whatever you like to call them, putting forward a party list of candidates, and then the entire membership would have voted based on an STV election and proportional to their support, you would have had X number of factional representatives from whatever group. They wouldn't have had a vote, but they would have had a voice, and that would guarantee that all perspectives within the party were heard. Now, I have been told that to have a representative sample in like a sortition system, you only need 1,000 people, and that would be being extremely generous. That'd be an extremely generous sample of the membership, and yet the people at the top wanted 13,000 people. Now, that's not because they thought having 13,000 people would make the founding conference more democratic. Completely the opposite, in fact. It was about mystifying the whole thing, giving people a belief that they were governing, but in reality, they wouldn't be in charge at all. A comrade of mine worked out because originally they were saying that they wanted 3,250 in the morning, 3,250 in the afternoon on both days. And a comrade of mine worked out that if each of them got to speak for 45 seconds, it would take 3 days to hear from everyone. You know, uh, a conference of 13,000 where 200 speak is no more democratic than a conference of 200 where all 200 get to speak. You know, it's as simple as that. And I think it was very much picked um, as a way of mystifying this entire process. The founding process of this party has been anti-democratic to its core. I don't think I even have to argue the case for that. I think everyone knows it. People, I think what has been shown is that the people at the top of this party, you know, they couldn't run a children's party, let alone a political one. You know, far from the mass participation that was promised, we've had mass disempowerment. And I think that's undeniable. And I think it was on purpose because I think they're afraid of the many actually. For all their talk of, a politics of for the many, not the few. When it comes to the question of the party itself, they're very much for the few and not the many. And I think you see this now with the attacks on grassroots organisations and everything in the capitalist press by people at the top of the party's nascent structure. I think they're terrified of the membership.
I feel like this kind of maybe answers my next question because I was going to ask you, have you had trouble or have you had opponents inside your party to your organization's agenda? I know that like for a long, long time, it's open to see there's been struggles to implement a democratic agenda, but specifically, have there been people against the democratic socialist organization?
Definitely. So we're constantly getting attacked on social media. Me in particular, I'm accused of being a wrecker, a saboteur. I get asked if I'm a member of MI5, am I working for Mossad, all sorts. We've held 2 public meetings, so far. Both times someone in the orbit of, Jeremy Corbyn has attended, and attempted to disrupt the meetings. Um, and, uh and we don't know why. Like, why? Look, we're just a group of members. We're just organising. We're arguing for more democracy in the party. What's the problem? And I think the only thing that can be taken from it, based on a complete balance of evidence of the way the founding process has been run and why it's been so secretive and nothing's been transparent. And you look at the crowd editing tool and the fact that it was supposed to be a crowd editing tool, but the crowd couldn't see the edits that other members of the crowd were making and everything like that, is I think they're absolutely terrified that they're gonna lose control at this conference or soon after. And their only way of hanging on is to attack. But I don't think it's gonna work. There was an article from Politics Home that came out probably 2 hours ago or whatever. When the sortition pool was announced a couple of weeks ago, they said something like 4,000 people were gonna be in attendance at the weekend. They're now saying to Politics Home that it will be 2,000. My personal belief is that they would be extremely lucky if 1,500 people turn up because it's been left so much to the last minute that the vast majority of people aren't gonna be able to afford to go. I think I've said, if I'm generous, 1,500 people. 1,000 is probably going to be more likely. And the overwhelming majority of them are going to be from the organised left, which means the people at the top, their time is coming to an end. And I think that's why they've started attacking not just Zara Sultana, but basically any group that's fighting for democracy within our movement, because they know that if the party was democratic, they wouldn't be in control.
Funny you mentioned that Politics Home article, because I was having a read, and it did reveal that some of the proposals the Democratic Socialists want are in there.
Yeah,
What ones? Can you talk me through which ones look like they're going to be adopted?
yeah. So, well, it's not that they're going to be adopted; it's that they're there to be voted upon. So, uh, as to the leadership model, it's now going to be counterposed between a single leader or a collective leadership. Um, they want to bring in. There's going to be an option for a people's whip, but it's not of the type that we want, whereby you would have socialists in office committees um, wherever the party has elected public officials, so at a local level, a regional level, a national level, or whatever, that are made up of party members who essentially hold elected public officials to account in between elections, not just uh, right before the election in terms of mandatory reselection, although we obviously do support mandatory reselection. But we also believe that the party should be able to co govern with those elected figures, because there was a poll that came out, it was a few years ago now. And I know some people are going to push back against this because they're going to go, oh, yeah, but a whole wave of independents were elected at the last election. But 6% of people in this country vote for candidates because they like the candidate. The other 94% vote for the political party, right? So that being the case, the party has a responsibility and the members have a responsibility. And since members are constituents anyway, they're like the advanced wing of elected officials, constituents. Um, they have a duty upon themselves to ensure that their elected representatives behave properly. There's stuff in there about recall. Uh, we're not sure what the level of the right to recall is going to be. In the initial drafts, it said that 40% of all members was like the threshold. Well, it should just be a simple majority in an all members meeting, really, because 40% of all members, well, you're never going to get anyone recalled ever then, because that's just way too high.
When it comes to the sort of public fights with your party, right? Is that is that the nature of organising a mass political party, or do you
Hmm.
think it's been uniquely a disaster?
No, 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 no. I think what we're witnessing in many ways is class struggle inside of our own organisation,
Hmm.
essentially. Like the fight for democracy is a class issue, right? Because the working class needs to win the battle for democracy. Because we're the only ones not only capable of doing so, but it's our right as the great social majority to rule over our society. And in terms of workers' party, that means that the membership should be the ruling class of its own organisation. What we have seen, however, is that there is a small minority of people at the top, mainly people who came out of uh, Jeremy Corbyn's leader's office, and they're kind of hangers on and apparatchiks and stuff like that, who believe that they should be the ruling class of this political party, and that we should just be grateful that they've, taken the initiative or whatever. I agree, somebody had to take the initiative in starting this party up, right? But it's then hypocritical to say, well, this is going to be a democratic party, and then fight tooth and nail to actually stop members from democratically participating in that party. You know, for the working class to shape its own destiny, members of a workers' party need to shape their party's own destiny.
So, I mean, this is just my personal opinion, or my personal hope, I suppose. Like, I want to see a successful Your Party, a mass democratic workers' party, but I still want to see the involvement of Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Sultana. Like, have all wings of the movement in there, but it is democratic. I mean, of course, let's be real here. There's been public fights, there's been factions. In my view, I've wanted to be above the faction, not because I'm better, but I mean, like, I don't want to lean into any particular factions. I want it all to work. Is that possible? Do you think it's genuinely possible that, because I think there's been some people who've been quite uh aggressive towards each other. It feels that they can't work together. Would it be naive for someone like me to say, mass democratic your party, working class party, but you've got everyone involved, and again, including Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana and others?
Yeah, no, I don't want anyone to leave. Like, I want Jeremy to be in this party. I want Zara to be in this party. But and it's inevitable that they will be the most prominent voices amongst the membership, right? But that doesn't mean that the party should be their own, private property, essentially, and that they should have absolute power within it or whatever. They need to be held accountable because they are going to fuck up at some point. Leaders always do, right? Whether formal or informal. Um, Personally, our view in DSYP, despite what some people on social media like to make out, is that we're not on Team Corbyn and we're not on Team Zara either. We're fundamentally on Team Democracy, right? And it's been actually quite upsetting to see the way that people who tend to be associated with what can only be described as like the Corbyn faction within the party have been unable to tell the difference between genuine kind of grassroots engagement and desire for the party to be something new, fresh, that's never been seen in British political life before. And, oh, well, you must just be supporting Zara over Jeremy, or you hate Jeremy, or this and that, which just isn't true. It's just not true. But I think it's largely a defense mechanism on their part. Um, and it's sad. It's incredibly sad, really, because a lot of the people involved I worked very closely with alongside in the Labour Party for many, many years, right? They're my friends, but I've seen them essentially degenerate into the Labour right. They're no better than them now. It's really sad. In some ways, they're worse. The Labour right would have actually given this whole founding process much more of a democratic veneer, while still it having an undemocratic outcome. But you saw the attempts to do that anyway through the founding documents. Because if you look at the founding documents as initially published, firstly, they were piss poor, right? It wasn't a constitution, it wasn't a set of standing orders. Um, it was a very bare bones thing with just questions for people to answer. They'd had months and months to do it, massive resources. DSYP members over the course of 3 weeks, working in their spare time, wrote a full constitution and full standing orders for the party that was fully fleshed out, fully worked out, and subject to amendment by our membership, right? And we published it online long before the people at the top finally pulled their finger out to put out four founding documents that were just a lot of what was supposed to be in the constitution was in the standing orders document. A lot of stuff that should have been in the standing orders document for some reason was in the organizational strategy, and a lot of stuff that really might have been in the political statement was in the organizational strategy. One document didn't logically flow from one another. It was designed to confuse, right? And it was largely made up of prefigurative, incredibly leading questions. And it did make me wonder at the time whether or not they should have even bothered having the regional assemblies or anything like that, because essentially what was being put in front of the membership was a survey. So they might as well have just hired a bunch of marketing students to stand in a shopping centre and ask the public questions. Oh, well, do you think this? Do you think that? And then instead of a party conference, they could have hired Les Dennis to hold a special Your Party edition of Family Fortunes and our survey says, and then that's how the party is brought into existence. And I think it was purposely designed that way. This entire thing is about mystifying the process, promising mass participation whilst guaranteeing mass disempowerment. And I think at the weekend, it's going to come back to bite them in the arse. There's going to be lots of tears at the weekend, guaranteed, but it won't be us Democrats who will be crying.
So, I mean, yeah, for me personally, I'm a supporter of Zara. I'm a supporter of Jeremy Corbyn, but I'm not in anyone's camp. I mean, you say you're the faction Democrats. I'm the faction of socialism. That's what I want to see.
Yeah, no, I'm team democracy.
Team democracy. Yeah. What's a successful your party conference look like then? Of course, you know it's not like that all the recommendations of the Dem Socs get implemented, but
No,
could what would you like to see where we can come away from the weekend thinking, okay, we're making some real progress here, and this is something we can all get behind?
I think if we come away with a collective leadership, that's the first step along the road to a party republic, because we would have stripped the power of MPs to rule over the party. The proposals that are appearing in the Politics Home article basically say that MPs will not be eligible to stand for any positions on the collective leadership. Now, I would personally like to see that extended to councillors as well. I think if you're an elected public official, you have one duty, which is to represent the party in whatever legislative chamber you're now a part of. You shouldn't then also be, you then shouldn't also have massive amounts of power inside of the organisation itself. You should be subordinate to democratic control. Um, I think I think mandatory reselections are given. I think the democratic whip is probably a given, although I would like to see that expanded along the lines previously said. Most of all, I think we need to make sure that these first CEC elections happen far sooner than is currently planned. I think we need to strip the Independent Alliance of absolutely any control whatsoever. Um, I've heard reliable rumours that the rest of the Independent Alliance, bar Jeremy, is planning on quitting the party anyway after the founding conference because they know it's not going to go their own way. Um, I think it was an absolute joke to say that the party should be under their stewardship. Like, why do we need to be stewarded? Why can't members rule their own organisation? Why do a bunch of MPs have to be the ones in charge? Um, yeah, so I think if we get that, then we're well on the road to a party republic. I do, however, think that the entire founding process needs to be restarted on truly democratic lines, lasting maybe 6 months to have a proper first annual conference, 5 days long in June or July, and but not stop everything else at the same time. So we need to be setting up party branches. We need to be going out there doing class organising. We obviously are going to be probably forced into standing some candidates in the local elections, but I think it would be incredibly stupid to just run candidates everywhere. I think we need a very much to adopt a targeted approach, not a scattergun one of just like, oh yeah, let's just chuck a load of candidates in um, and see what happens. And I think also that you run the risk if you do that, that people will come across as very demoralized because obviously, you know, these past 6 months have been brutal, right? Due to the factional battles at the top of the party. And so the public don't have a very good opinion of us right now. And that's understandable, right? However, there's going to be more local elections in 2 years' time. And that will be 18 months out to a general election, right? So we will have a much better understanding of our popularity amongst the electorate then than we would do now. We really need to focus on the work of digging trenches in society and embedding ourselves as the heart of, and the party is the center of working class life in this country. And that's going to take time. You know, we're not going to win the next election. We probably won't win the next election after that, or even the next election after that. People forget it took the Labour Party 24 years to form its first government, and that was a minority government, right? And we need to be doing it on a completely different basis. I believe that, you know, we shouldn't take on the responsibility of government unless we have 50% support, 50% plus one support the population, right? Because without an outright majority in society, not just in the electorate, but within society, it would be incredibly difficult to carry our kind of politics through, right? We also have the fact that, you know, um, it's not simply a case, and this is where I kind of have a lot of disagreement with our comrades in the Greens, right? Is because the Greens seem to believe that all you need to do is you need to elect a parliamentary majority, and then you can just carry out your program. But the fact of the matter is that one, there would be massive opposition to our program inside of the state, not just outside of it, but inside the state itself. 40 years of privatization has basically meant that the state doesn't have the capacity to do a lot of the things that we want to do. And the senior levels of the civil service and inside intelligence agencies and things like that would be incredibly opposed to what we want to do. And realistically, we would need to take something like 20,000 people from the membership inside the state with us to act as organizers. If you don't do that, you won't be able to carry your program out, right? And I think, the Greens don't really have a theory of the state at all to go on. I think they've got a lot of good ideas. Some of it I think is a little bit wishy-washy. Uh, but fundamentally, I think that they wouldn't be able to carry their program out even if they wanted to. Even if they won 60% of the vote, I don't think that they would be able to do it because you need a popular majority within society, and you need to have a party that is prepared to um, uh, go into the state to transform it. However, you run the risk, and this was the risk that we always ran under Corbynism, right, during the 2015, 2019, is that let's say we had one in 2017 or we had one in 2019, the best and the brightest of the movement would inevitably have been catapulted into the state, but it would have meant that there would be nobody on the outside left to organise, right? And we have to adopt very much a strategy of an in and against strategy in that case.
If the conference, in your personal view, if the conference doesn't go in a way you think is productive or beneficial, and you feel like it might not be a vehicle for change, what do you suggest? What's your view? Do you think it's still important to back your party in whatever capacity it is, or do you think there should be
Yeah,
another
no,
alternative?
no. I have no desire whatsoever to leave the party. Nobody in DSYP does at all. Um, we don't think this conference is like the end. If we don't get everything that we want, it doesn't mean it's the end. We've still got CEC elections to take place, and then there'll be another party conference sometime next year or whatever. So it's still very much all to play for. Um, there's been a lot of talk online that there's this sort of threat from the organised left and that we're going to try and split the party or anything like that. But I think actually, when you look at the evidence on balance, if there's going to be a split in the party, it's going to come from the right wing of the party. And the right wing of the party are basically the people around Jeremy Corbyn. Because if they lose control, they're going to spit their dummy out. And some people might think that I'm being a bit ridiculous here, but as I said earlier, I've known these people for a very long time, and I know that the way they think. And if they don't get their own way, they'd much rather burn the house down than let it continue.
I mean, people will be surprised that you said there's a right of the party. I mean,
Yeah, there's right
because
and
obviously
left wing
with
in all
Jeremy
political
Corbyn and his
parties.
team, he was the left of the party in Labour.
Yeah.
So a lot of people wouldn't understand what you mean when we say, oh, they
All
represent the
political
right.
parties all political parties have a left and a right. All political parties. The Tory party has a left and a right. Ken Clarke is the leader of the left wing of the Conservative Party. It's just a fact. Thatcher called them dries and wets. If you were on the right, you were dry. You were a dry Tory. If you were on the left of the Tory party, you were a wet Tory, right? All political parties, including left wing ones, have a left and a right. It's the exact same argument, the argument that there isn't such a thing as a right wing of the left wing party, that the right wing of the Labour Party used to make. Oh, no one's right wing in the Labour Party because we're a left wing party. There's always a left and a right. It's obvious. It's obvious. And the people around Corbyn want to pursue a kind of bread and butter social democratic agenda, right? And as you said, those of us in DSYP, and I would argue the overwhelming majority of the party, want to pursue an actually socialist agenda, right? Social democracy is to the right of democratic socialism. They're not synonymous with one another. There was a time prior to the First World War that they were synonymous with one another, but that was over a century ago. And we in DSYP don't think that the job of the party is to simply, try to manage capitalism, but to change society and redefine its finer values. And if that means we're on the left of the party, we're on the left of the party. But the people around Jeremy Corbyn are definitely on the conservative wing of a left wing party. That's not to say that they are Tories, I mean small c conservative in their ambitions vis-a-vis the working class movement. We're going for the lot. We believe in working class self emancipation. We don't believe that it's a gift to freedom is a gift to be given to working class people. It's something that the working class has to fight for in its own name. We don't want a kind of Robin Hood figure uh, going out there stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. We want the poor to be in command.
Nothing's too good for the working class.
Nothing.
Nothing. Max, that was a really interesting conversation. I look forward to conference to see what transpires, but I really appreciate you coming on and having quite a lengthy conversation about some internal structures. But yeah,
That's all
very
right.
informative. So thank you for coming on.
Oh, that's all right. I apologise to your viewers if I've waffled.
Oh no, definitely not. The longer, the better. More people
Yeah,
informed. Yes. So thank you again, Max.
wonderful. Thank you very much.